Like many metropolitan cities, Sacramento has a significant gang problem with close to 5,000 validated gang members living in the region. In 2009, Sacramento was identified as having the second largest violent crime rate of the 10 largest cities in California, second only to Oakland. The statistics showed that the highest percentage of that violence was happening among 16 to 25-year-olds, many of whom were gang members, had repeat criminal offenses, were on probation, or had spent time in jail or juvenile hall. The Sacramento Safe Community Partnership was formed to implement a ceasefire-style approach in neighborhoods of the city most impacted by gang and gun violence. The partnership is a collaborative between a variety of government, community, and faith-based groups who willingly share their experience with implementing the model.
ACT for the past 20 years has really been working in the Sacramento community citywide to really address issues, root causes of issues in the community, social ills. So around the time that we started thinking about ceasefire was ACT had actually been working with the collaborative of youth pastors that were trying to address a lot of the issues that were associated with the challenges that youth were facing in the city. So that stemmed from truancy in schools, to violence, to a number of other factors. And because one of those serious root causes of those issues was violence, we began researching and figuring out what are some of the solutions to a lot of these problems that were facing the youth at that time.
They actually went to a presentation in another city, I believe it was Union City, saw what a presentation on ceasefire said, hey, we got to be doing this in Sacramento. Came back to Sacramento and invited law enforcement community, faith-based leaders, community members, and said, hey, here's this program, we want to show it, we want to do it here.
I think we had to look at what was best for Sacramento. There's a number of other violence strategies out there, but we really felt that there was a need for there to be a carrot and stick approach, since so many of the issues that were facing youth were not just violence. It was a lack of opportunities, it was a lack of jobs, and the Boston model really gave us the opportunity to present those opportunities and those services to youth, and not just be heavy street outreach, which a lot of the other models are really heavy on a street outreach. But we really wanted this to be a life-changing sort of effort with youth, bringing them opportunities, bringing them jobs that were really going to change their lives.
Well, well, first off, SETA's been involved with programs that deal with at-risk youth for a very long time. Some years ago, we were involved with the youth prevention program, and then we went into being involved in the youth challenge program, which I was part of that as well, where we dealt with youth that were coming out of the state prisons. And so also, we've been partners with ACT a long time, and ACT, we've worked with them in terms of challenges with challenging youth and at-risk youth. And so ACT, they came to us and asked if we, wanted to partner with them on this whole ceasefire initiative. And ACT and SETA and Sacramento Police Department and some other partners decided, okay, we're going to go ahead and look at a ceasefire model. So they went to the Bay Area to look at the model that the ceasefire had, look at the ceasefire model, and I believe it was Oakland. We went down there to see what Oakland's ceasefire model would look like, and just in terms of, well, is that something that we can do here in Sacramento? And so they went down there, they looked at it and decided, okay, we're going to come together on this and start planning this. What does it take? And, I think basically those partners were meeting for a whole year before we even began this ceasefire model. For a whole year, just in the planning process, they had to look at the data and figure out what areas were, where the most crime was, and those type of things, and the police department provided a lot of the data, so we looked at the data to see, okay, where do we begin? Where are the hot spots in Sacramento? So it was those type of things, then building on that, we've had other people from other ceasefire initiatives come in and speak to us and just to figure this whole thing out. How do we begin? So that's basically how we began and how we got involved with ceasefire. And we knew that when we worked with other programs with the at-risk youth, that we wanted to take it a step further. There's a problem and there's a need, so we wanted to take that a step further. So we got involved with ceasefire.
The 5 building blocks of the ceasefire strategy. The ceasefire approach to reducing violence has evolved into an evidence-based, data-driven model which can be replicated in any community. It's not a cookie-cutter approach, and each city is researched extensively to understand the nature of the particular problem and to tailor specific solutions to the needs of their individual community.
Program is the data analysis. You got to do your homework ahead of time to see where your problems are, or else you're just doing that shotgun approach.
2011, we kind of had a flurry of youth homicides in Sacramento. And it kind of culminated with what became known as the barbershop shootings. So I think what happened was, from my understanding, is what I saw was that the community, once again, basically showed us certain force of unity and basically demanded from local leaders and officials that something be done. And so I think that show of force that came together on Stockton Boulevard that afternoon, that early morning, really triggered something, and the mayor felt compelled, and he was called out, and he stepped up to the plate and held several stakeholder meetings, and it was decided through those meetings that he would establish the Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force.
A huge group of our congregation was fully aware of the problems within our neighborhood. So we began to talk about the violence. We began to talk about what was going on. And then there was a defining moment that really brought home that we need to act, and we need to act now. And that was when a young lady got killed protecting her son at a barbershop. And at that moment, we got a charge from the mayor that, hey, he's wanting the faith community to act and to respond to this. And our way of responding to this was to go out, engage the community, and start the night walks.
You probably already know we started in South Sacramento, that we identified 3 areas in the city with the highest rates of violence, shootings, and the macro corridor had the highest. And then our data analysis showed that 2 primary gangs and some subsets of each gang were causing the majority of violence. And I think I mentioned earlier, there was a total of 28 shootings between these 2 gangs prior to ceasefire starting in 18 months. That's a lot, and it was getting into just a gang war. So the data analysis showed it, and then at the time I was in our Special Investigations Division, and I was running our gang unit and narcotics unit. So once the data analysis showed what gangs were involved, my gang detectives worked along with probation and our problem-oriented policing teams were able to identify who within that gang are the active drivers. You may have 250 members in a gang, but not all of them will be active. You might have 50 that are really driving.
One of the things that first thing we try to do is get an understanding of the problem. So that's when we did the focus groups. We did informational interviews. We did, discussions with youth, law enforcement, faith leaders, school officials. And from that information, we put together a strategic plan. So we wanted to first understand how the community understands the problem, look at the data, and then start identifying some key strategies and some best practices that's been utilized in other cities and other places, and kind of put that into a plan.
It just was a matter of gathering the right people together. Our affiliates in other cities, neighboring cities, were actually interested in this ceasefire effort at the time that it started. So we were able to take a group to really go and meet a lot of the technical assistant trainers that were helping those other cities develop this initiative. So, so by bringing them there and having them bought in and learn how it all works, it's very easy to come back to Sacramento and just start figuring out who else needs to be at the table and going from there.
This is not a cookie cut kind of recipe. It steadily can be added to and increased and developed as people take a stand and say, hey, I want to be a part of ceasefire. I want to be a part of changing our city. So we invite everybody to be a part of it.
It's critical, and anytime you start working with the community all across the board, first off, this particular program takes a whole community to be effective. It's not just law enforcement. You know, we can't arrest our way out of this problem. You got to get everyone involved to focus on it. So that's key. And it's also the fact that we were all in there at the beginning when the technical advisors came to us and said, this is what the program is about, here's how it works. So everyone hears the same message.
Well, I really think it had to do with relationships that we had already established in the community. So early on, we were working with a group that had previously worked with the police department and knew kind of the go-to guy within the department that would really have a heart for seeing this strategy come to Sacramento. So, so just kind of figuring out who were key people that we already knew would have a stake in this, and just started calling them. With the police department, we were very fortunate that they were on board from the jump. And we just went in and did presentations that kept drilling down that this is an evidence-based program that we know works. We have the faith community standing behind this, saying that they're willing to do their part to make it happen, and just continued that process of just calling, engaging folks that we knew would have a stake in this being successful.
But this program is one of the only ones I've ever seen that go after the drivers of violence. These are guys that have a pretty lengthy arrest history. They've and they've worked their way up to violence, so they've been doing some violent acts for a while. So
one thing I can say about ceasefire in Sacramento is we haven't shied away from anybody. We go to incorporate the most active and the most influential gang members and those that are drivers of violence, because this population is probably not going to just respond to an all-call for services. The leverage that we have to reasonably direct participants to show up and to follow up is a pretty important component to their participation, and it showed through pretty good attendance.
Through the work of law enforcement, probation, and getting the right people, which are the shot callers of different gangs, there at the right time, as well as getting the right community leaders. You want the right people speaking into these kids' life that will help motivate them, as well as you want the backing of the community there to say, hey, enough is enough. We are all standing together on the same page, asking you to stop the violence and supporting law enforcement if you decide to continue on and doing violent crimes in their decision and having to do their job. So it was a real collaborative effort of all of us coming together to identify the right people to bring to the table as far as the gang offenders, and then the right community leaders, the right personnel there to position everybody.
We get our referrals from SAC PD. And what it is that SAC PD identifies those that are considered drivers of violence, and so we have them come into a location that we've designated like a community center or one of those things, and they all come in. We have partners that are part of the call-in, like SAC PD, the DA, or SETA case managers, street outreach, probation, and those partners are sitting around a table talking to the youth that come in to the call-in, and the basic message is that the violence needs to stop.
Well, through previous relationships, our ongoing relationship that ACT has had with different organizations in Sacramento, we first went to them. We knew that SETA had done some work with us previously on youth jobs. We knew we wanted to have a component that really provided jobs and opportunities for youth, so called them up. Just looking at the Boston model, we knew that there was all these other pieces, and just began kind of cold calling. With the police department, they took the role of kind of overseeing the overall project management piece of this. SETA, they specialize in jobs and career training and job training, so it just was a nice fit that they would take on that piece. And then ACT's role has really been to coordinate the faith-based or community efforts of this whole initiative. So I think in the end, everyone fit in where their specialty, where their specialty was.
So did you go?
In working with these youth, we provide the employment and training services for youth. We through our one-stop career centers. They come in and they can get information on all types of services out there in the community, as well as our services. So that's basically our part of it. Our street outreach people, those people, they're contracted with us through the effort. And the street outreach basically go out into the community and build relationships with the community as well as with the young people that we're serving, to kind of build those relationships to get the young people as well as the community into that mindset of change. That's basically what street outreach workers are responsible for, and some other things as well. The street outreach work with our case managers. The case managers work with the street outreach in assisting these youth, so they can kind of have a whole sort of a wraparound of services. We also refer youth out to some of our other partners, like Faith-Based is involved with this as well. We have mentoring service, substance abuse service. Those are things that we can refer these young people out to if they're willing to accept services.
We understand the value system of the population that we're trying to impact. Ingrained in the fiber of gang and violence is the understanding that you don't cooperate with the police. So law enforcement presence a lot of times gets in the way of the ability of the outreach workers, the case workers, and during the night walks, because folks are leery that there's a collaboration or a relationship that's too close. So
young people come in, this is something they've been doing most of their lives, gang banging and on the streets. They come from dysfunctional families a lot of the times, and a lot of them have dropped out of high school, and they're just living on the street day to day. And so trying to affect a change with these young people is really, really, really a challenge, because they don't see themselves in any other lifestyle, So it's just really hard to get through that. You can step away from this, you can live a different way.
My typical client is a gang-validated driver of violence in Sacramento. Usually when they come to me, depending on their educational background, it depends on what I can do with them. I'll have people with no education. I'll have some with a high school diploma, and typically they want to work their way out of their problems. The gang and the criminal mentality that they have, the violent mentality that they have, is really hard to compete with. They're used to violence, flattery, and just being out there. Now here I come as a case manager trying to present work readiness, education, and counseling, which they do not see as a need. That's my challenge. Just the dreadlocks, the dreadlocks, the tattoos. How do I get a customer to say that, I'll take this guy?
Most of the partners leave except for the case managers and the street outreach people, and maybe a couple of other folks that are willing to help us do an assessment. We have a little mini assessment where we get their names, their address, phone numbers, their contact information, so that we can follow up and call them, and we invite them to come into an orientation within the next 48 hours, come into an orientation so we can expand on the services that we can provide.
Yeah, so definitely, ceasefire actually started before the Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force got established, so they were up and running. As we know, that was a grassroots, faith-based initiative, and it's been strongly, led by the faith-based community. However, when we got our plan together, we definitely incorporated it into the plan, and it's been identified as one of the key initiatives that we want to, provide support and try to look how we can expand that strategy to other parts of the city. So I've been asked recently to sit on the policy leadership team for ceasefire, and so we've started integrating some of those efforts and connecting the dots so that we can kind of leverage resources and kind of work together in trying to address this youth and gang violence issue in our neighborhoods.
Well, it was more personal for us because where our church is positioned at is right in the heart of where the crimes and gang activity occurs. And historically the church has focused indoors and implemented the programs that they've implemented and really not aligned themselves with the city, with law enforcement, with the different partnerships that we've been able to align through ceasefire. And so we knew we had to act. We knew we had to be a part of what this work was doing because it brought the whole community together. It brought the congregation together. It brought the law enforcement. It brought the state agencies, and it brought community organizations together. And the night walks are a time to where we begin to go out and listen to the concerns of the community, be in position when violent crimes happen, be in position at the time that is the most kind of trafficky time that people come outdoors. But in our community, they were afraid to come outdoors because of what was happening. So we targeted the night walks at those times to stop the violence and to engage the community, to empower the community, and to love upon the community.
So what have you seen from the...
And the communities felt vested. And what we thought were just normal gang prevention programs, organizations, a lot of them outside of the box were still interested. So that brought together folks from mental health, brought together folks from the schools, law enforcement, hospitals, and they all wanted to come to these trainings that we did on the thug mentality. And so that showed that there was a strong community interest, strong community engagement, and a lot of those folks are still involved right now with the newly established Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force. All the key stakeholders, and get them on board. As we know, we say it all the time, law enforcement is not going to be the solution. So we can't arrest our way out of this problem. So we had to get the community on board, and so we reached out to all the community stakeholders, and they all responded. And because it has to be a community-based solution. The Gang Prevention Task Force has this role, and so does law enforcement, but it has to be a community-based solution. So we convene, one of our roles is convening all the stakeholders, and then trying to provide some coordination and infrastructure to implement some of the key initiatives that need to be implemented on a neighborhood level. And then lastly is to hold everyone accountable, and that's including youth, parents, schools, teachers, community-based organizations that are getting the funding, and local leaders.
It's all about relationships. When you build relationships with people, a lot of the faith-based leaders I'd never met before, I got to know them. You build that trust and that relationship, and you start working together better. They know where law enforcement typically, when people see us, what are we doing all the time? We arrest people, and we do a very good job at it. This program is getting away from that traditional method.
We went in with the approach of listening to the community, and not with the approach of trying to tell them what the problems were. They already knew what the problems were. They knew that it was shootings, they knew it was drive-bys, they knew it was drug deals, they knew where they were, they knew how they were. And the church had typically had an approach of, in the past, going into the community that we didn't want to go with. And so we decided that we were going to go in listening to the community. And within the first month, we just said, okay, we're going to position ourselves in the community and just listen to the concerns, get the respect, get the street cred from the community. Once we did that, we began to establish a real authentic relationship with the people in the community.
When looking at the outcomes of success, it's important that we keep in mind and understand the culture of gangs and violence. To be able to do outreach and to try to embrace active gang members and drivers of violence to participate in a program where law enforcement is a key component is contrary to even their value system as far as doing anything that cooperates with law enforcement. These youngsters lack a support base at home, they lack resources, and when they wake up in the morning, going and getting a job and trying to clean up isn't at the forefront of their mind. It really takes a real effort and the ability to convey genuine interest in their welfare to get them to show up to the call-ins so that they can see and be part of the resources that are there. With the DA, the participants being put on notice about the violence, and sometimes when participants reoffend and they're involved in violence, I know that ceasefire, their participation and them being exposed to that opportunity sometimes becomes part of the outcome of their disposition in court. I think it's important as a probation officer that I keep at the forefront of my mind the responsibility to utilize my authority to do what's best for the probationer. Sometimes it's not about a helping hand and it's accountability. However, whether it's a referral for a job or incarceration, I just make sure that it's what's best for the probationer. Well, the way that it's worked in ceasefire at every level, whether it's a probationer, the family, and the community, the clients are real leery of any real close relationship with the badge. So for the purpose of being able to maintain and develop rapport for the outreach workers, the case workers, and the faith-based during their march, we kind of separate my participation and presence when they're doing those things to help them foster a rapport at those levels. Well, probation is supportive of ceasefire. There are a lot of components that, of course, correlate with probation's position to embrace evidence-based practices.
We've had a tremendous positive response with the faith-based community. And there's many reasons why that's very important. One is they're out in the community, they're out doing night walks in the areas. I know it scared me to death when they first went out there. I'm thinking, oh my God, someone's gonna get hurt. But they came back with stories of, hey, we talked with not only the community saying, hey, we need to get involved, explain the program, but they were talking to some of these gang members and saying, hey, we want to pray for you, and they were very receptive to it most of the time. I mean, I found that kind of shocking at first, but I was like, this is fantastic. But it's also, they have credibility in the community. It's their community out there going to their churches that need to understand what the program's about, to have the bosses support it, because then, as an agency, obviously we support, so he's instrumental in saying, no, we need to be involved in this. Obviously we had some positive effect, but it takes resources also. I know we've been cut pretty substantially as an agency. Probation's been cut tremendously. As I was mentioning before, we had 2 full gang investigations teams. We had our problem-oriented policing teams, and all of those people got laid off, trying to prevent those arrests and get kids to take a different path away from violence. But we still have that arrest in there if we need to. Well, when they heard that, they loved it. They had to you have to get that buy-off from law enforcement. Yeah, we're okay with not arresting people. We don't want to put people in prison. And then we also needed that commitment from them that if we had to go that path, that they would support us. That message has to be that if the violence continues, we as a community, law enforcement and non-enforcement, will stand together and do what we have to do to stop the violence.
There are a lot of components to ceasefire that correlate with the department's pursuit of the implementation of evidence-based practices. We work with faith-based, there's referrals, there's life skills. SETA utilizes assessments, and as long as we're able to do these things without any commitment for additional resources, I think we'll be all right.
We had a young man come to us. He was actually referred, so we actually got him in a call-in, and he had his high school diploma already, and he was very motivated. We put him in a work experience. However, he came to me and he quit. But we didn't give up on him. He said, just find me another place. We found him a work experience place at a cleaning company. He did so well that the owner not only hired him after his work experience was done, he became the supervisor of his other peers. And not only that, he had a baby, he got his own apartment, and he is now working 2 jobs and still supervising the crew in the South area.
I think it's important to keep in mind what it is we look for as success. There are different components to ceasefire that are working, that make it a success outside of outright numbers and statistics. There are a lot of these participants that might have to go to jail or get violated once or twice before they realize that they want to make the investment for change, and at that point they do call.
A year later, the violence has stopped. It was told to me a couple of months ago from one of our law enforcement personnel that during the hours and times that our night walk is going on, it's the safest time of the streets. There are actually lower and less dispatch calls during the times that we do the night walks in the streets in South Sacramento. Most of all, the greatest success story is in the area of high violence, shootings, gang activity. We've seen a tremendous drop in gang violence and shootings and kids dying. And for me, if we saved one life in that community, we made a difference, and we saved a lot of lives, and we're continuing to do that as we develop the ceasefire approach.
They call it their ceasefire strategy. And tonight, several community groups and law enforcement agencies are calling it a success. Well, tonight, hundreds of people came out to see for themselves whether ceasefire is working in the battle against gang violence. News 10's Ann Fon joined in the search for answers.
We've seen this strategy work. We'd now like for law enforcement and also elected officials to make sure that this becomes a priority in our region.
Supporters say ceasefire helps reduce violence with weekly night walks as seen in these pictures. The ceasefire strategy also involves interventions with gang members.
The purpose of tonight's meeting is to celebrate the success of ceasefire.
Tonight, ceasefire advocates claim their efforts help reduce gang shootings among 2 targeted gangs by 70%. Sacramento police agree.
So they were in an actual war prior to, they had like 28 shootings in about 18 months prior to starting the program. That's why we focused on those 2 gangs, and obviously afterwards the evaluation showed that we dropped those shootings 70%.
The group also claimed its efforts help reduce violence citywide by more than 16%.
You know, we can't claim that it was all because of ceasefire, but I think that was a program we had going in the area that was outside of the norm of years past, so I think we had a positive effect.
And law enforcement went up.
Montez says more needs to be done to combat the problem, and it takes ex-gang members like himself.
The way you deal with this violence is you establish relationships with these people, right? You have to take this time to walk the streets, but you have to use ex-gang members or people from this specific hood or from another hood and these guys are familiar with, right?
Pretty impressive record. The Sacramento Police and Sheriff's Department say budget cuts and layoffs mean they need all the help they can get to battle the gang problem. So far, they say the joint effort involving police, churches, and the DA's office is working. The ceasefire effort has worked in 6 other cities around the country, including Boston.